All the killings and imprisonments, all the cruelty could not quell the flames. Quite the opposite. The struggle grew tremendously. It was demonstrated that no power on earth could stop a determined people's movement. It did seem for a while that Parliament was incapable of understanding the life and death struggle being played out just outside its walls. Members of Parliament were busy discussing wildlife conservation. How could one expect members of Parliament who are appointed on the basis of land holding to bite the hand that feeds them? After all, an oppressive regime cannot be expected to organize the workers. It knows it would be committing suicide. The choice it was left with was to further exploit the working class. No sooner had Ndalkacho's cabinet moved into the picture that Muslim Ethiopians came out in a demonstration with historic dimensions. Rejecting the use of religion for purposes of repression, the Muslim community demonstrated its determination to rid the country of the policy of divide and rule. The demonstration frightened the new cabinet. It had the opposite effect on the people. They made it crystal clear that no longer would they tolerate division on national, linguistic and religious lines. The demonstration totally enveloped Addis Ababa, and the new cabinet gave the impression that it had accepted the demands. But it was much later, after the overthrow of the ex-king, that a far-reaching solution was reached. The rumblings of the 4th Brigade at Negeli in December 1973 cannot be forgotten. The brigade was suffering from thirst in a country known for its fertility. The soldiers pleaded for attention, but the government emissary dispatched to look into the matter would only attempt to deceive them. The angry soldiers got even angrier. Policy of divide and rule had also been applied on the armed forces. Even uniforms were varied to reduce cohesion amongst the soldiers. But the army men realized that while uniforms may divide them, they were united in class. And the day came when they faced the enemy in unity under the slogan Ethiopia Tikdem, or Ethiopia First. Joining hands with the people, on June the 28th, they formed the Armed Forces Coordinating Committee. It was a day of jubilation for their allies. For their enemies, it was a time of despair, and it couldn't have been otherwise. It was history being played out.
Ethiopia, a land of 3,000 years of freedom. Ethiopia, a place of misery for her oppressed sons and daughters. Ethiopia, a country with a long, proud royal tradition. Ethiopia, a land where her people suffered under rulers blinded with riches. Ethiopia, a paradise with 13 months of sunshine. Ethiopia, 13 months of dread, 13 months of hell.
Famine gripped the land. The regime denied its presence. While people kept dying, the greedy officials diverted grain from the hungry and made handsome profits. In this way, hundreds of thousands were silently, cruelly allowed to die. The people's bitter anger received a reply on September the 12th, when the symbol of exploitation, repression, and evil, Haile Selassie, was deposed. It was a decisive moment of joy and hope, and on the horizons of Ethiopia dawned a new chapter of history. December 1974, a provisional military government declares socialism to be its goal. This significant step forward was an indication that the national healing and construction process was on the way. The next day, on the 21st of December, the Development Through Cooperation campaign was launched. Thousands of young Ethiopians promptly left their homes and families to educate peasants all over the country. 90% of Ethiopians had never gone to school. Illiteracy was extremely high, and the few that did manage to attend institutions of learning received a distorted form of education that was not geared to the pressing needs the country felt. The whole emphasis of Ethiopian education was on liberal arts, which did not produce the engineers, the doctors, and the development cadres that any developing country desperately is in need of. Rural Ethiopians received the youngsters warmly. With the young people among them, the peasants became even more motivated and ready for the struggle ahead. To pay education tax, but his child never attended school. He paid health tax, but his family never saw a doctor. He gave his money, his labor, his produce, and his animals, but he received nothing. Who cared for the peasant? Living the life of the farmers, the student campaigners educated the masses. They taught the ABC of socialism and helped the farmers improve their lives. Peasants were given medical advice and benefited from practical demonstrations. The campaigners widened the peasants' horizons. They conscientized and organized them. It was the only way the students could pay the peasants back for contributing to their education while his children received none. The peasant had carried the society on his shoulders so far only to be exploited even more. He produced grain for another's consumption. and build the homes for the comfort of others. The campaigners taught the peasant that his strength lay in unity and that his future lay in revolution. They educated his children who for years had taken care of livestock instead of tasting the fruits of modern education. The campaigners had the obligation to spread the light, and they did. Their mission helped the peasant to grasp his reality and to reach out for his own solutions. The Rural Land Proclamation, declared on the 4th of March 1975, gave the peasant the opportunity he needed. It destroyed the bonds of servitude that had been imposed on him for centuries by feudal barons. The proclamation was a positive response to the demand, land to the tiller. This popular demand was satisfied and the peasant gained his right to till the soil freed from exploitation. The nationalization of rural lands was greeted not only by peasants, but by all progressive Ethiopians with demonstrations and great joy. Spontaneous gatherings took place everywhere. It was clear to everyone that it would no longer be possible to live off the sweat of others. Naturally, the landlords resisted and some took to the bush to disrupt the situation and replace it with feudalism. Much damage was done before the broad masses dealt final blows to feudalists who had tried once again to divide the people by tribe and religion. Landlords continued to resist. After all, they had lost their vast estates in such areas as Mens, Kutabar, Gojam, and Sidamo. They realized that the ideal life of the feudal baron was over. They brutally turned their guns against the people, particularly peasants. In Bonga and Limu, they cruelly burned people in their own huts. Before land was nationalized in 1975, it had been the property of a few privileged classes. About 25% of all land was owned by the church. The rest of the arable land was divided amongst feudal families. Whenever peasants rose in rebellion, whole areas were bombed. Today, peasants are no longer foreigners in their own land. They are no longer imprisoned in jails built by their money. Today, Ethiopian peasants are for once tasting the fruit of liberation, of freedom. Today, the peasants have organized themselves. They are farming cooperatively. They take care of their own defense and security. The time has passed when they were at the mercy of the whims of their masters. For the student campaigners, the 2 years in the countryside was a vital educational experience. Student and peasant taught and learned from one another. This two-way exchange is the dynamics of communication, of national integration. The life of the peasant was hard, and the campaigners internalized this very well. The revolution gained tempo. Urban land and extra houses were nationalized. Factories and large foreign enterprises were brought under public ownership. Such measures were embraced by the people, but they meant financial and political death for counter-revolutionaries. Counter-revolution then spread from the rural to urban areas, and a concerted effort to destroy the revolution got underway. One example is the attempt to assassinate Comrade Chairman Mengistu in September of 1976. Many progressives were killed, but though fighters can be murdered, the struggle continues.
ሻለቃ መንግስቱ ኃይለ ማርያም ለጋዜጠኞች መግለጫውን የሰጡት ትናንት መስከረም 13 ቀን 1969 ዓመተ ምህረት ከምሽቱ 2 ሰዓት ተኩል ላይ ከቢሮአቸው ወጥተው ወደ መኖሪያ ቤታቸው ሲሄዱ ሶማሊያንና ስርዓተ አልበኞች በሕይወታቸው ላይ ያደረጉትን የመግደል ሙከራ ምክንያት በማድረግ ነው። በአንደኛው ምክትል ሊቀመንበር ላይ የተደረገው የመግደል ሙከራ ሳይሳካ መቅረቱ በዜና መገለጡ ይታወሳል። ከዚህም በቀር ሻለቃ መንግስቱም ሆኑ አብረዋቸው የነበሩት ሰዎች በደህና ሁኔታ የሚገኙ መሆናቸው ተገልጿል።
የኔ መሞት የኢትዮጵያን አብዮት አይቀለብስም።
In the area of foreign policy, Ethiopia since the revolution declared that she stood for peace, justice and equality. She had appealed to her neighbors to jointly raise the living standards of the peoples in the area. To Somalia, she extended an invitation to cooperatively attack poverty, disease and ignorance. Ethiopians and Somalis, two peoples united by the Wabi Shabali River, got a fleeting glimpse of a future of peace and prosperity. But intoxicated with grand illusions of a greater Somalia, the Bare regime was prepared not for peace, but for war. Ethiopians and Somalis would have fed themselves by irrigating the Wabi River. Tractors instead of tanks would have been familiar sights in the Ogaden. The earth would have been filled with seeds and not explosives. But Ethiopia's goodwill did not receive a positive response. The Somali response was devastating. In a bid to crush the Ethiopian economy, the expansionist Somali regime blew up the railway link between Addis Ababa and Djibouti. The destruction of bridges on the line had immediate consequences. Schools that Ethiopia built for her people in the Ogaden were bombed. Communication lines, development projects, churches and mosques were systematically destroyed. This was the response from Mogadishu to Ethiopia's offer of friendship. People of Ethiopia, your proud and sacred land has been defiled. Ever since 1974, for the past 2.5 years, your class enemies, personified in the so-called EDU, EPRP, and the Eritrean secessionist groups, have left no stone unturned in their frantic attempts to reverse your revolution. They have been externally assisted by international imperialism and neighboring reactionary regimes. Their various plots and activities have now reached a stage of open aggression. oppressed Ethiopian workers, oppressed Ethiopian peasants, genuine progressives and patriots. This is the time to defend your revolution. Now is the time to prepare to destroy the enemy which is attempting to carve out your land. Now is the time to join hands with your men in uniform to put an end to the open aggression against your motherland and revolution. We stand up and say no to racism, colonialism, discrimination based on religion and sex. We say never again to exploitation and oppression. We stand for complete freedom, equality, justice, and full democratic rights all over the world. For these principles, truths, and correct aspirations, the oppressed people of the world, the workers, progressives, and democratic forces are standing with us. So we shall triumph. Arm yourselves. The Ethiopian people have been known for their courage, bravery, and for their jealously guarded independence. Once again today, they proved themselves and achieved even greater distinction. The prophets of doom declared that Ethiopia would disintegrate, that it would shrink in size. The prophecy was ignored by the people who rose to a man against invasion. Muslims, Christians, all united. They said, revolutionary motherland or death. With darkness all around them, instead of dividing, the Ethiopians grew closer together. Far from disintegrating, they united to the pleasure of their friends and despair of their enemies. It was a time of urgency, and people's militia units from various regions soon began to acquaint themselves with modern weapons. Ethiopian people, jealous of their independence and deeply agitated against the imperialist orchestrated invasion, were determined to teach the enemy an unforgettable lesson. A revolutionary people would never start a destructive war, but never would they accept defeat. Never would they allow their principles of freedom and equality to be challenged. Faced with imperialist-inspired Somali aggression, the Ethiopian people were not frightened or confused. Socialism, the time-tested hope of peoples, was never easily built. Socialism was constructed in a struggle between the people and enemies of the people. Army's invasion of Ethiopia has put an end to our patience. Our war is to defend our motherland and not to invade the land of others. Our aim, not to kill with impunity, but to protect its people. Therefore, we shall be victorious. The broad masses of Ethiopia responded to the call of the motherland with burning nationalism. To protect the revolution, they organized themselves to fight on the war front as well as to protect the hinterland. The call of the motherland released the energies of the people. Harmoniously, they served their country by preparing provisions and by combating the enemy in the far reaches of Ethiopia.
For nation, for revolution, for unity, for freedom, I shall labor without rest. Tired, but still not tired. Weak, but yet not weak. I do what I can, what I must, ignoring my agony, tightening my belt. Filled with smoke, believing in victory, I shall fight with decision, raising my sword in heroism to stop the enemy within